It's not just in Canada or the Commonwealth or even just English-speaking countries where almost everyone can quote Shakespeare, sometimes without even knowing it. As luck would have it, in this brave new world, the game is afoot, and we could come full circle to quote him forever and a day. Shakespeare's words, phrases, and dramatic clarity are so influential they are, well, inevitable. Holger Syme is Associate Professor of English at the University of Toronto at Mississauga and joins us now to look at how Shakespeare's words have shaped the world. Welcome.
Hello.
So nice to have you here.
It's lovely to be here.
Now, it's been 400 years since Shakespeare died, but his legacy continues to endure. How come?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, the question of what Shakespeare's legacy is a tricky question to answer to begin with. Right? Is it the words on the page? Is it plays in the theatre? If it's the latter, then, well, what does that mean? Because the things that we put on stage now, what a show looks like now, is different from country to country, from theatre culture to theatre culture. And no matter what it is, it's almost certainly something that's extremely different from the thing that Shakespeare envisaged.
But even in my opening, a lot of those phrases,
Yes.
we use them every day. I had no idea that that was Shakespeare.
Well, that's because many of them aren't.
Oh, they're not?
No, I mean, like the game's afoot.
Yeah.
Is just a regular hunting term. It happens that Shakespeare used that phrase, and so you now in those sort of compilations of phrases that Shakespeare invented, it's one of the ones that shows up. That doesn't mean that Shakespeare actually came up with it. Where does that? I actually think we're sort of getting. We're getting it backwards by giving Shakespeare the credit for those things.
Why?
Well, historically, what happens is that Shakespeare becomes culturally central, and in a completely new way in the 19th century. And then suddenly, everything Shakespeare ever wrote attains a cultural capital that people can tap into by using those phrases and crediting Shakespeare with them, rather than just using a phrase. Right? So suddenly it becomes a quotation. I mean, to some extent, one thing that happens to Shakespeare over the course of centuries is that it becomes a kind of icon of the writer or the creative mind, the genius, whatever that means. Right? I mean, if you in like even like 1990s clip art stuff, the icon for the writer is a bald guy with a goatee. And a ruff around his neck. Right?
Shakespeare.
That's Shakespeare.
Yeah.
As everyone knows,
Yeah.
right? You may never have read Shakespeare,
Yeah.
but you know that guy's Shakespeare. And that means something, right? Now, exactly what that means, I think is actually really amorphous, right? And in a way, it has nothing to do with Shakespeare in any concrete way. And we know this because people know who Shakespeare is, even if they've never read Shakespeare.
So he's become a brand.
He's become a brand. Okay, yeah, Shakespeare became a brand quite a while ago. I mean, well over 100 years ago. So there's a sort of, in a way, right? That Shakespeare, like the Shakespeare that you can put on fridge magnets, as I do, right? Is not the Shakespeare. It's divorced from the Shakespeare of the plays or the poems or the performances.
I'm wondering, was he as popular in his day as he is as popular now, in our time?
Not quite. Right? Again, it's popularity is a tricky term, right? Shakespeare's plays sold really well, comparatively speaking, in his own day. They sold, by and large, more copies than other playwrights' plays. But in particular, those were his history plays. So plays about English chronicle history, Henry V, Henry IV, Richard III, Richard II. Those plays sold really well. His comedies, as far as we can tell, didn't. So Midsummer Night's Dream was not a bestseller. That's in print. On the stage, we don't actually know because we don't have any data. We don't have box office receipts, right? But presumably they also did okay in the theater.
Speaking of box office receipts, I read an article in which you said that if Shakespeare was here now, he would be working in Hollywood?
I'd say so, yeah.
Why?
Because Shakespeare's primary objective, I'd say, was to make money.
Not to express what was happening inside him?
No, I don't think so.
Really?
I think that obviously also mattered in some sense, but no, if Shakespeare had primarily been concerned with like his deep thoughts or his emotions or whatever, like the sort of things we sort of associate with writers often now, that has a lot to do with Romanticism and the heritage of Romanticism. If Shakespeare had been that kind of writer, he'd only have written poetry. He didn't. Shakespeare wrote for the popular entertainment medium of his time. And actually, so I know I said that, but I take that back, and I would be writing for TV.
I want to read you a poll that market research firm YouGov did this year on Shakespeare's popularity. So in a survey of 18,000 people around the world, when asked, do you like Shakespeare, 44% of people in Germany said yes, in the United Kingdom, 59%, in the States, 63%, in Brazil, 87%, Mexico, 88%, India, 89%. What jumps at you when you look at those numbers?
I think it's really fascinating. I mean, I think there are probably different narratives in those figures, right? So I'm going to assume that the great popularity in India has something to do with colonial heritage and the sort of the British school system that was established in India, and the sort of and that heritage, right? Or hangover, whatever you want to call that. Mexico is really fascinating. Brazil, I mean, I would imagine that, say, in Brazil, most people would read Shakespeare in translation, right, rather than in the original. That's certainly the case in Germany. And that's part of the story of Shakespeare's popularity, is that there are in various cultures, and I don't know about Portuguese, but in German and in Russian, for instance, there are translations of Shakespeare that are canonical, as like people know those texts, they can quote them, and they are as quotable in German and in Russian as they are in English. So what Shakespeare means in those cultures is actually not quite the same thing, not quite the same thing as what Shakespeare means in England or in the US or in Canada.
I thought it was fascinating that in England, not very many people cared about Shakespeare.
Well, I guess it sort of means what you mean by like, right?
Right.
I mean, like, who are those 18,000 people? Like, how have they experienced Shakespeare? Is the Shakespeare they like or dislike the Shakespeare they had to read in high school? Is it the Shakespeare that they saw on stage, which probably means Midsummer Night's Dream?
Does that make a difference?
Yes, I think it makes a huge difference. Because if you're reading Shakespeare, especially if you're quite young, I think you either, and if you have an excellent teacher, that obviously helps. Right? But Shakespeare is difficult.
Because of the language?
Those plays are 400 years old, and even at the time they were written, they weren't easy plays. Like, Shakespeare is not an easy writer. So they're difficult plays to read.
So what made it difficult? Was it a unique language that he was using?
No. No, actually, not at all. And so that is one of the stories about Shakespeare. Shakespeare invented lots of words. Shakespeare was this incredibly fertile language machine, and that's not actually true at all. Like other playwrights had a larger vocabulary than Shakespeare. Other playwrights made up more words. So no, what's difficult about Shakespeare is I think an interest in dense language.
What do you mean by dense language?
An interest in expressing things in a non-straightforward way. And that has more to do with phrasing. And it has nothing to do necessarily with the complexity of the words as such. Right? To be or not to be is a really simple, just on the level of the word, is a really simple statement or question.
So if it's in stage, people, even if you might not understand the phrase,
yes.
I guess body language.
Yeah, the actors help.
The actors help.
Right? And I think, exactly. So on stage, and it's sort of, I mean, we often talk about a good actor as someone who makes the text really clear. And I'm not quite sure I believe that.
Why not?
I think a good actor, what can an actor do to make a really difficult text easy to understand? I mean, they can obviously help with phrasing, with pausing, with emphasizing certain words. But if the thought is highly complex, then you might not get it anyway, right? At first hearing it. And if the words have lost their meaning, or if the meaning of a word has changed, an actor saying it really slowly won't change the fact that you have no idea what the word means.
Well, speaking of that, we have a clip of an actor reading from Richard II. Let's take a look.
I have been studying how I may compare this prison where I live unto the world. And for because the world is populous, and here is not a creator but myself, I cannot do it. Yet I'll hammer it out. My brain, I'll prove the female to my soul the father, and these two beget a generation of still breeding thoughts, and these same thoughts people this little world. In humans like the people of this world, for no thought is contented.
So on YouTube, that clip is being sold as that's the Shakespearean pronunciation.
Right.
What do you think?
Well, I think that's probably true, right?
But what does that mean also?
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not a historical linguist, right? So I can't actually critique that. But it is apparently more or less what English sounded like in Shakespeare's time. And there's a movement in modern performance now where actors and directors try to replicate that with the intention of getting closer to the feeling of Shakespeare's language in its day, and with the conviction that if you use that kind of pronunciation rather than what is so standard in most Shakespeare performance now, which is received pronunciation, which is sort of what used to be BBC English, right? Which is a dialect that didn't exist in Shakespeare's time. So it has nothing to do with Shakespeare, whereas this does. Now, the problem with this is that this is not what English sounds like anymore. Right? So in a way, it takes Shakespeare further away from present day experience, from present day English. And I actually think it makes it harder to understand rather than easier. But that speech in particular, so that speech, right? It's exactly the sort of thing I was talking about. It's really simple language. Right? The word "people" appears 3 times. Like there's nothing there's not a single word except maybe the word "generation" in that speech that is difficult. But actually, let me ask you: like, did you like listening to this?
Yes.
Do you know exactly what he was talking about?
Not really.
Well, good.
I want to say I do, but yeah.
But good for you.
Yeah, I was mesmerized by how he. I was trying to understand what he was saying.
Right.
But I think because I was trying to understand, I kind of lost what was happening in the scene. And do you think that if you use a language that people might not be able to understand, that takes away from what's happening?
It might. Yeah, I think it might.
Yeah.
I mean, I think what might help with that accent, right, is that it refocuses you on the language, and you kind of have to listen just to understand the words, and that might then get you to listen more closely than you might otherwise. Where I think, but what I said earlier about actors helping, right, I think the way actors help is that you can always watch the actor, you can enjoy the actor, and you can kind of get the gist of what's going on simply by watching. And if you don't understand half the words, that doesn't matter so much. Now, I actually think that's not just a modern experience of watching Shakespeare. That's partly how Shakespeare works, that not understanding half the words is that's Shakespeare's dramaturgy. And in some cases, you can actually see it in really concrete ways, like in Macbeth. When Macbeth thinks he can't wash the blood off his hands, he says, if he tried to wash it in the ocean, I'd rather the multitudinous seas incarnadine, making the green one red. Now, that's 2 lines.
Does that mean that what the blood is going to seep into something else?
The ocean, the entire ocean will become red if I try to wash my hands in it, but it won't wash it off my hands. I'll make the ocean bloody, the ocean will not get my hands clean. Now, but what he's doing there is that first line, the multitudinous seas incarnadine, the only word in that line that's understandable is seas. Multitudinous, well, that might mean huge, it might mean varied, it might... Incarnadine is a word that Shakespeare makes up, and it's a crazy word, right? I mean, you have to know that carnadine is red, and then you have to figure out that, oh, incarnadine or incarnadine, depending where you're from, then must mean make red. But the line's way past through already by the time your brain has got there.
So he was alive in 16th century
Yes.
England. What was Shakespeare responding to? What was happening in their society?
Everything was changing, and that's a part of why Shakespeare's language is creative and sort of difficult, because he's responding to a world that is in flux in a way that was probably unprecedented. The Reformation, the sudden appearance of a different kind of Christianity that had as large a legitimate claim on being the right religion as Catholicism had in certain parts of Europe. So how you worshipped suddenly changed overnight, in a way, in Britain, in England. The discovery of the New World, the rise of colonialism, the rise of the merchant classes, the sort of unsettling of an old feudal system, where you ended up in life more or less depended on what you were born as, and you could kind of predict what you would be at the day you died, depending on who you were born as. That was really changing in Shakespeare's day. And Shakespeare was the son of a glove maker. Christopher Marlowe, Shakespeare's great fellow playwright, was the son of a cobbler. I mean, there's so that the disappearance of completely rigid class boundaries, the spread of literacy, like all of those things were happening at the same time. The rise of print culture, so the world was changing on an almost daily basis, especially if you lived in a place like London, which was, a kind of multicultural metropolis, where more people moved than were born there. It's not unlike present-day Toronto, actually. And Shakespeare was right in the middle of that. Now, so he responded to that. Other playwrights, and playwrights in particular, responded to this sort of thing, right? Because it's a popular medium. They write for a very broad and very mixed audience that is increasingly urban and metropolitan as well. And so all of those things get reflected in that medium probably most directly. Now, Shakespeare responds to that in one way. Other playwrights respond to it differently. And what's different about Shakespeare is that Shakespeare doesn't respond as topically as many other playwrights.
I have another clip to show you, and I want to get your thoughts on it afterwards.
All right.
Hello, my name is Drew Hayden Taylor, and I'm an Anishinaabe playwright and novelist. And my favorite Shakespeare play is The Tempest, one of his later pieces. One of the reasons I like that is it's actually a comment on colonialism. Prospero takes over this island and subjugates the indigenous population. You've got Ariel, you've got Caliban. And when I sit and I watch it and I read it and I listen to it, to me it is an exploration of in some ways, North America. I once saw a production of it taking place in the Haida Gwaii Islands, and it was phenomenal. Added a whole different context to it.
What do you think about what he said?
That's fascinating. I mean, I think it's exactly right. Right? The Tempest is a play about colonialism. It wasn't really legible as that, though, until the 20th century. Like, that's not really how people talk about the Tempest. Until post-colonialism sort of becomes visible as a historical development. It's one thing that's uncanny about the Tempest is that I think that description was pretty much accurate. I mean, Prospero, Prospero himself is exiled. That's what complicates it a bit, right? He's exiled from his own kingdom. He's deposed and exiled to this island. But then once he gets there, he's welcomed by Caliban, the person who inhabits this island and who claims it as his own, although Caliban may also be a kind of colonial force, because his own mother was brought there, and Ariel, who is the spirit, is in a way the original inhabitant, who keeps getting imprisoned and enslaved by successive generations of colonizers. But Caliban welcomes Prospero, and we get this narrative in the play where Caliban says, well, I showed you everything. I brought you to where the springs were. I showed you the berries. And you, in return, taught me language. And now all I have left is this language. You taught me to curse. And that's all I've got left now.
It's kind of true, because most people learn how to curse in
that's
every
true,
language, right?
But, it's also, but it also replicates, right? So this is written at a time before colonialism. I mean, colonization was happening, but England was not an empire yet. Right? But Shakespeare writes about this experience of the colonized subject in a really extraordinarily prescient way. In that narrative, right, of welcoming the colonizer in, creating the conditions under which the colonizer can survive in this foreign territory, and then becoming displaced and enslaved as a reward for that. That's obviously a very recognizable narrative, right?
For sure, now it is.
Yes, exactly, now it is.
Yeah.
But I've no idea how Shakespeare knew that.
I have another clip for you. It's the 20th anniversary of director Baz Luhrmann's Romeo and Juliet with Claire Danes and Leonardo DiCaprio. Let's take a look. So what do you think of that? How?
I love that film. And that scene in particular, I think, is extremely smart. That doesn't happen in the play. In the play, all we get is Romeo saying, "Who's that woman?" to a servant. So Shakespeare doesn't actually tell you how to stage that. It's a blank. Right? It's up to the director. What Luhrmann does in that scene with that fish tank is they look at each other, but they also see each other's. They also see their own reflection. So that weird combination of love at first sight, but also narcissism, is, I think, exactly true to the play. That's exactly the love that Romeo and Juliet have. Juliet's first thought when she's waiting for Romeo to finally come to her bed is what'll happen when Romeo dies. Right? It's like, it's not actually, neither of them imagines a long life together. It's all about what'll happen to me. What'll happen to me? It's not about coupledom or happy married life.
It's more about like myself, the individual.
Yeah.
And finally, if you, what would you tell people? What play should they acquaint themselves with that they might not have already?
Titus Andronicus.
Why?
Because it's hilarious. It's incredibly vicious. It's Shakespeare in Quentin Tarantino mode. But it also has everything in it. It's one of Shakespeare's earlier plays. It's a play that generations of critics thought was really stupid. It's been reclaimed, first in the theater and then in scholarship in the 20th century. It's a fantastic play. It has almost everything in it already that we value about Shakespeare, that's interesting about Shakespeare, the politics of it, the weird anachronism of it, although it's set in Rome, it also seems to be set in contemporary Britain. And there's some really great speeches in it. It's one of the lesser known plays, but I think one of the most Shakespearean plays in the canon.
It's been so fascinating speaking with you, Holger. I think I might have to take one of your classes because I want to know more. I want to know more. Thank you for being here.
No, it's been a pleasure.
And thank you for your insight.
Help TVO create a better world through the power of learning. Visit TVO.org and make a tax-deductible donation today.